Hey guys, Mike here, the Detroit Borg with a look at the new 2013 MacBook Pros with Retina display. So I have both the 13-inch and 15-inch model, but we're going to take a look at the 13-inch in this video, save the 15-inch for the next video. So we're going to unbox this, take a look at the specs, and see what's new, as well as see what the benchmarks reveal about the performance of these new Haswell machines. Now the 13-inch model is slightly newer than the 15-inch model because they've actually redesigned the chassis, so it's now thinner and lighter than before. The 15-inch is pretty much the same externally. Both have received similar internal updates, and we'll talk about that when we get to specific models. But the 13-inch model is now 0.71 inches thin versus 0.75. It's also 3.46 pounds versus about 3.6 pounds from last year. So it's now thinner and lighter. It's actually the same thinness of the 15-inch model now. So the 13-inch model used to be slightly thicker than the 15-inch, so both are now 0.71 inches thin. Now, just like the MacBook Airs, these have also been upgraded to Intel Haswell processors, which really boost battery performance. So we go from 7 hours to 9 hours, which is a significant performance gain. Now, the 13-inch model only comes with dual-core processors, so standard we get a 2.4 gigahertz dual-core i5. You can configure this all the way up to an i7 clocked at 2.8 gigahertz. This also comes standard with 4 gigs of RAM, which is a cut from last year, which had 8 gig standard, but they've cut pricing down. So we go from $14.99 for base to $12.99 for base. Now the base also gives you a 128 gig SSD. So if you go to the next model up, you get 8 gigs of RAM and a 256 gig SSD. Now the SSD has also benefited from PCIe connections in the motherboard. So you now get faster SSDs with this model. Of course, we'll test this out in benchmarking. We also get Thunderbolt 2.0 or Thunderbolt 2, which doubles the performance of last year's Thunderbolt or Thunderbolt 1. So we go from 10 gigs to now 20 gigs. We also have 802.11 AC Wi-Fi now built into this new MacBook. Now we also have Intel's new Iris graphics with the 13-inch model, while the 15-inch model gets the new Iris Pro graphics. That's integrated graphics with significantly better performance. That's all integrated with the new Haswell processor, so it's kind of built into the die. Now this boosts performance up by 90% from the Intel HD Graphics 4000 that was in this MacBook previously. Alright, so let's go ahead and crack this open and take a look at the inside. First, we're going to have to cut this plastic off, so I'm just going to slice it here. Alright, so I'm just going to lift the lid, and as you can see, I kind of cut the plastic around the edges so I can keep it around the box. That's just how I like to do things. So here you have the MacBook Pro with Retina display with the little tab here to lift it up. You can see that's the hinge side of the laptop, and toward the front you can see our thumbnail port for popping open that lid. And again, it is thinner, again 0.71 versus 0.75 inches along the side. So it does feel a little thinner, does feel a little lighter than the last model. Alright, so inside we'll find our power cable and this little wrapper here, so you can see our connector here. We also have our 60-watt power adapter. The 15-inch model actually gets an 85-watt power adapter. You can see this is a MagSafe 2 connector, so it's a little thinner. The MagSafe 2 connectors succeeding the ones that were on the previous generation MacBook Pros. So you can see we have our brick here, wrapped in plastic. You can see our wall adapter, which you can pop off and connect your extension cable if you prefer. Of course, if you're traveling, you can also swap out your adapter for the local wall adapters. Now, this also has built-in cable management, so if you want to wind up your cable, tuck it away in your bag, there you go. Now, we also have our literature packet designed by Apple in California. So we'll find a quick start guide. It tells you a little bit about, in this case, Mavericks. So we have this literature updated for Mavericks. You can see, looks like they haven't quite updated the iLife and iWorks suite here. So the icons are still the older ones, but this is running Mavericks. We have the MacBook Pro. We also have our Apple stickers. And of course, with that glossy Retina display, they give us a little microfiber cloth branded Apple for cleaning that display. All right, so let's go ahead and get to our 13-inch MacBook Pro. We have a little tab here to break that seal. Should slide right out. Alright, so let's go and take a look at our new thinner and lighter 13-inch MacBook Pro with Retina display. So along the side, you'll find your MagSafe 2 power connector, which is thinner. So if we take our MagSafe 2 cable here, we're going to pop off this little plastic protector they put on it for shipping. You can see that the connector itself is all aluminum, and if you connect it, you can see it's magnetic. It will give you a little indicator there, letting us know if it's charging. So right now it's green for fully charged and amber for charging, and it easily pops off so you don't accidentally snag it. It's strong enough not to be easily removed, and you can see it pretty much connects by itself if you hover it near the port. You have your new Thunderbolt 2 ports, which also are display ports, so you can output this to two displays if you prefer. We also have USB 3.0. We have our headphone jack and dual microphones. The headphone jack is a combination headphone jack as well as microphone. Along the front, you'll just find your thumbnail port here to pop open the lid. Along the side, you'll find an SD XC card slot as well as an HDMI out port and another USB 3.0 port. Now along the back, you'll find that hinge along with your ventilation, which is integrated into the hinge. Again, if you look down here, you can see that these ports for the vents are actually drilled or milled into the unibody aluminum. Now taking a look at the bottom, you can see we have a single panel here held on with these pentalobular screws. Now this really isn't meant to be removed. This is not a user upgradable computer. It has RAM soldered to the motherboard. The battery is glued to the chassis. So it's pretty much only meant to be removed by professional service people, such as the Apple Genius Bar or something like that. So when you order your MacBook, keep that in mind. You can upgrade the RAM, and the 4 gigs of RAM standard is a little low. I would recommend upgrading to the 8 gig model, which also upgrades the storage from 128 gigs to 256 gigs. Now along the side, you see we have these vents here, which also act as speaker grills. These also act as structural members here. This strengthens the body of the chassis. You can see that on the left-hand and right-hand side. Up here, you'll see your Mac Pro branding along with your serial number and information. All of this has been removed from the screen. This used to be on the screen with the old MacBook Pros. All right, so let's go ahead and open our MacBook Pro for the first time. So if we lift the lid here, you can see you can lift the lid without having to hold them apart. So there's just enough force to keep the lid sturdy without lifting the entire MacBook up. So very nice. You can see we have our paper here protecting the screen from the keyboard. So if we take a look at that hinge, you can see the ventilation in the chassis. So we have our full-size glass trackpad with multi-touch, one of the best trackpads in the industry. We also have our full-size backlit keyboard with our standard OS X controls up here. So we have launcher as well as mission control. We have our media controls for volume. We have our power button, escape, our screen brightness, as well as our keyboard brightness. Before I turn on this display, I just want to show you the anti-reflective properties here. So you can kind of see that it does a pretty good job minimizing glare, but of course this is still a glossy display. Now when this launched last year, Apple claimed that this was 70% less reflective than the at the time current MacBook Pros. Now the 15-inch MacBook Pro, the one without the Retina display, has been completely discontinued while the 13-inch MacBook Pro is still around. Alright, so I'm just going to power this on for the first time. Just tap and hold the power button in the upper right corner. Alright, so we're going to set this up. We're going to use English. We're going to select our country, United States. We're going to select our keyboard layout for the US. We're going to select my network, which is labeled Time Capsule. Now it's given me the option to transfer my information from another Mac, from a Time Machine backup, from another startup volume. I can also transfer from a PC, or I can go ahead and do that later. So that's what I'm going to do right now. I'm going to go ahead and log in with my Apple ID. Now it's asking permission to allow iCloud to locate this computer with Find My Mac, which I'm going to allow. So I just have to agree to the terms and conditions. Agree. Next step is to create a computer account so I can name it, I can give it a password, that sort of thing. Now because we're running Mavericks, it wants me to set up iCloud Keychain, which I'll do later. Let's go ahead and register this with Apple. Alright, so there we go. We're ready to start using our new MacBook Pro. Now, of course, the big news here is the Retina display. So this is carried over from last year. Again, it's an LCD IPS display with a resolution of 2560 by 1600. That's good for a pixel density of 227. That's the highest pixel density of any Mac laptop right now. At best, the 15-inch model. Now, the 15-inch model has a larger resolution, a 2880 by 1800 screen, which gives a pixel density of 220, so slightly lower. Now, if you look up top, hidden in the bezel is a 720p FaceTime camera. Again, carried over from last year. We also have an ambient light sensor for automatically adjusting screen brightness, as well as an LED indicator letting you know when the camera is active. Now, if you look along the bezel around the glass, you'll see this rubber gasket, which seals up the display and lifts it off the metal body of the chassis. So if you close it, you can see a nice seal around it and a nice cushion to prevent the glass from touching the aluminum. Now, both 13-inch MacBook Pro and MacBook Air are a little different in terms of their packaging. So you can see that the MacBook Air is actually taller, wider, and deeper than the 13-inch MacBook Pro. This is a more angular design, so it takes up more volume. The chassis takes up more volume than the tapered design of the MacBook Air. Now, they're actually pretty close in terms terms of their overall thickness. So this is 0.68 inches, this is 0.71 inches. So they're now very close in terms of their thinness. Now the interesting thing here is that the MacBook Air at its thickest point is thicker than the chassis of the 13-inch MacBook Pro, but of course we have a thicker display for that Retina display on the MacBook Pro. So overall, this is still a thinner design. It's also much lighter. Not quite a pound less. This is 2.98 pounds versus 3.46 pounds. Now you can see there's a little less reflectivity on the MacBook Pro with Retina display, so you can see a little more reflectivity with the MacBook Air. Now besides higher resolution here, we also have that IPS display versus the MacBook Air's TN display, which looks kind of terrible off axis. So if you kind of bend the laptop down to control glare, you can see the screen washes out while the MacBook Pro stays pretty dark and crisp. Now if you look really closely at the display, this is far closer than you would work. You can see some pixels here, but it gives you an idea of just how sharp this is versus something like the MacBook Air. Now if we look at the MacBook Air, you can see just how much more pixelated it appears compared to the 13-inch MacBook Pro. Now the 13-inch and 15-inch models have the same large glass trackpad. You can see there's a little more space around it on the 15-inch model, but they both have the same backlit keyboards with the same controls, so they feel about the same. Of course, the displays are different, but you can see that the bezel around them are both equally small, so they maintain a pretty small, lightweight, and compact form factor. Now both of them have the exact same I/O. They both have the MagSafe 2 connector, an SD-XC card slot, 2 USB 3.0 ports, 2 Thunderbolt 2 ports, and both have dual microphones as well as a combination headphone microphone jack. Now in terms of our benchmarks, if we look at Cinebench, the 13-inch model scored about 20 frames per second and 225 CB on the CPU score. Now if we go to the high-end 15-inch model, you can see the differences here. So the OpenGL score there is 53 frames per second and the CPU score is 620, so more than double the performance of the 13-inch model, and that's what happens when you add dedicated graphics as well as quad-core CPU performance. Now in terms of our Geekbench 3 scores, you can see the 13-inch does a pretty respectable job here, especially on the single core score. It's not a huge gain from the 15-inch model, but of course with 4 cores on the 15-inch versus dual cores on the 13-inch, there's a huge gain in terms of multi-core score. So you can see it's almost double on the 15-inch versus the 13-inch. Now all MacBooks for 2013 have also been updated with PCIe storage, which more than doubles the performance of the SSD read-write speed. So last year we could have expected about 300 on write and maybe 400 on read. This year we're seeing double that with almost 700 on write and almost 750 on read. So in conclusion, the 13-inch MacBook Pro with Retina display is better than ever. They retain that beautiful LCD IPS Retina display. We have a thinner, lighter design that makes you wonder why bother with the 13-inch MacBook Air when you could get something like this now at a much lower price point, $1299. But unfortunately, at $1299, you get a fairly low-spec computer. Now, you get great internal CPUs, you get a great integrated graphics solution, but you only get 4 gigs of RAM and 120 gig SSD. For me, that's a little tight, especially for a computer that you can't upgrade yourself. I definitely recommend going up to the next level. Of course, that increases the price quite a bit from $1299 to $1499, but I think it's worth it. It's more future-proof because you have more RAM for a modern operating system, and you have more storage, so you have less to worry about in terms of running out of storage. So I do recommend the 13-inch MacBook Pro with Retina display. If you can't afford the upgrade, I still think it's a great computer, but I have a hard time recommending something with such little RAM.